Welcome back to Pips-N-Chits. Today I will be painting the Universal Classic monster, the Mummy, from the 1-5 player game Horrified, published by Ravensburger. And as you can see here, hopefully this is focusing, I've already prepped the miniature here and he's already ready to be painted in my Citadel holder. I went ahead and primed him with Wraithbone, a contrast paint primer made by Citadel. And the reason I chose that is because it's a much it's brighter, and I think with the paint selection that we're using here to cover him up, it's going to be a much warmer tone than Gray Seer. I think Gray Seer might have muted the color a little bit too much. It would have been a much cooler overall color, where I think Wraithbone is really going to help this one stand out. As you can see, there's not too many details here. This model, again, he's about 95% bandages here. He's only got a little bit of a face and hands sticking out. And so what I'm going to do here is we're going to use a contrast paint. I'm going to use a Skeleton Horde as my contrast paint, but fearing that it might be a little bit too dark, and because I know I want to do some highlights with traditional acrylic paints, I'm going to actually thin this down a little bit with some technical contrast medium. I'm probably going to do a ratio of 2 parts Skeleton Horde to 1 part technical medium here. And I'm going to go ahead and measure that out with my little eyedropper here. After I mix the paints up, put them in one of these pots, and I'm just going to slather it on the mini with my Army Painter Regiment brush here. I'm not too worried about a little spillover. If I get some on his hands and his face, that's okay. I have a pot here of this Wraithbone that we could go back and clean up the hands and the face. So get ready when we paint that. Speaking of the flesh and on his hands and face, I don't want to go another green value here because we've already done the creature from the Black Lagoon in green, and Frankenstein is also going to be green, but I want to give him kind of a sickly, decayed look. So I'm going to choose something very pale, like a very pale green. I'm going to mix in a little bit of gray and even a little bit of purple to kind of have some of that flesh color, you know, give a little bit of flesh, a hint to it. As far as his eyes go, I'm not quite sure what I want to do yet. I think the eyes are a prominent feature here on this miniature. Do I want to give him kind of an ethereal, magical look by, you know, painting in something like a neon blue and then darken it up around the edges with, you know, kind of a purple shade? Or do I want to go more with a, you know, kind of a yellowish orange look? I'll decide that later. As far as the base goes here, kind of plain looking, and as you saw from my creature from the Black Lagoon model, well, we did some effects with landscaping. I'm going to do something, I'm going to try something that I have never tried before. I'm going to stipple on some various bright colors here on the bottom, and once the, you know, kind of like a random pattern, because when that's done, I'm going to try this texture, Agrellan Earth, for the first time. And what it is a crackle paint. You put on a pretty decent thickness, you know, not too thick but not too thin paint, and once this dries, it begins to separate and crack, and what it does is it'll expose those colors underneath here. I'm also probably going to add maybe a rock, but I'm going to paint that to look more like a limestone brick that you might find in Egypt, maybe like part of a tomb, or, you know, part of, you know, something that you might see in the pyramids. We'll probably use a little bit of yellow flowers, again, some meadow flowers and some desert shrubbery here to give it the idea that he's coming out of Egypt there. So with that being said, let me go ahead and readjust the camera here because it's kind of hard to paint with the camera right in front of my face. I'm going to put it off to the side so it'll be a little bit angled, and we'll get to painting. Okay, I went ahead and adjusted the camera here. Hopefully I get everything in frame. So what I'm doing right now is I'm taking my Skeleton Horde and I'm mixing it up along with my technical medium we're going to open this up here and measure out a couple of drops. I think first I'll start with the technical medium here. I'm going to go ahead and get 1, 2 drops there. Oops, I think that's off. Let me turn this around just a tad here. I got 2 drops of technical medium in there. And so what I'm going to do now is with the skeleton horde, I'm going to add about 4 drops. That should give me enough paint to cover the whole model. Let me crack this open here. And we're going to go ahead and dig in. Get some of this excess water off my dropper. So I'm sucking up so 1, 2, 3, 4 drops right in there. So that should be a good ratio of 2 to 1. And if I need to mix up a little bit more, I'll go ahead and do that. But for right now, I'm going to close my pots up so I don't accidentally spill them. I have my regiment brush ready. Let me get my my little magnifying glass ready to see here, and I'm going to mix this up. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start this upside down a little bit, because I want the paint to run in a direction that it doesn't cover up the base too much. Get around his neck. I'm going to try to avoid his face a little bit. Let's get the top here. You can argue that these bandages on the top of his head, it might just be a single bandage with some hair sticking out. Boris Karloff starred in The Mummy in I think it was 1932 when the movie came out, and I want to not necessarily stick to the promotional art there. The posters back then, are pretty much all black and white. So you kind of have to use your imagination there. But I think that this is doing a fine job here of getting, we missed a little bit on his foot. So again, we want to kind of do a once over here, make sure that we got all the little nooks and crannies that the brush can reach into. Not so hard, but as you can see, this is already, 90% done. Okay, welcome back. We went ahead and let our contrast paint Skeleton Horde fully dry, and this is the end result. I think it's pretty good. One thing I wanted to point out, I did have a little bleed over in the hand here and just a little bit on the face. So one of the things that I went ahead and bought was I bought this base of Wraithbone in a pot, and I watered it down just a little bit and touched up a little bit up on the face here, the cheek, and the hands, the fingers. The contrast paint had actually gotten in and colored that all out. And it was important too that we show a little bit of the wrist. So before I get to the face, I think I'm going to try to actually do some highlights right now. My Army Painter small dry brush here, and I'm going to go ahead and open the pot. There's no need to mix this stuff. It's pretty thick. And I'm just going to grab a little bit right there and get some on my brush. And what I'm going to do now is with a paper towel, I'm going to try to take off as much of this as I can, just so that there's a little bit off. Hopefully you can see that there. And now I'm going to go ahead and take Just going to experiment on the back of the leg, and if I don't like it, I will go ahead and try something else here. Okay, I got my Screaming Skull out, and I'm gonna shake it up. It's a little bit lighter in color, as you can see here next to this Tyrant Skull. It's a little light, you know, another 1 or 2 shades lighter. So we're gonna get some of this up. Gonna add a little bit of water just to thin it down just a bit, and I've got my wet palette here. Let me get out some of this paint. We're going to put a little dollop, just a little bit right here on my palette. Get my brush, get a little bit of water in there, and just thin it down just a little bit so it flows a little bit better. And what we're going to do here is I'm just going to pick out a couple of things right on the chest. Okay, I went ahead and mixed up some a skin color that I'm going to use very lightly on his face and his hands. And what I did is I started with a little bit of Administratum gray from Citadel, and then I mixed in some of this MRP Undead skin, and just a tiny bit of this purple shadow. The purple shadow is actually very, very strong pigmentation. So as you can see here on my wet palette, I experimented a little bit. This was a little bit too purple, but I have this kind of gray color with a little bit of green and purple mixed in. I think will be okay. I could add a little bit more of this green in there just to make it a little bit pale. But I think that's good, and we'll end up putting some shade on the model in a bit. So let me get to painting here. So let's go ahead and start with the hand here. Okay, I'm back, and we're getting ready to shade the face and the hands here. I got some pink Horror from Citadel, and I watered it down quite heavily, And with my smallest brush that I could, I tried to get a little bit of that pink into those face grooves there in the cheek, where the cheek might be tearing away or rotting away. It's very subtle. I mean, most people, you probably might not even see it actually, but I know it's there, and I only did the one side. I tried doing it on the other side as well, but it looked a little funny, so I ended up kind of painting back over it. There's a small little remnant there, that's fine. So we're going to get on to the shading. So um, I was thinking about this, and I wanted to use some dark tone, but I wanted to mix in a little bit of purple as well, just for some interest in the hues there. So what I got is Army Painter Dark Tone. I put 1 drop here, and I added a little bit of water. I haven't mixed it up yet, but I wanted to really thin that down. I didn't want it too dark, but this is equivalent to Citadel's Nuln Oil. It's a very heavy, dark wash ink. And in the pot right next to it up here, I used Army Painter's Purple Tone, and I put a drop in there. So once I've mixed my black and water up, what I think I'm going to do here is just take a little bit of that purple and mix it in. It's very, let's get a little bit more in there. I think it's going to be very subtle once I have it mixing here on the side here. I don't know if you can see, but there's just a little bit of a purple hue to it. It's very, very subtle. But with that, we're going to go ahead and shade. Oops. I'm going to shade our hand here. See how that goes. Let's start with the back of the hand, actually. There we go. Yeah, that's pretty nice. So notice that wash is getting right into the grooves of his hand there. And we'll go ahead and do the front side now. I think that purple really adds a little bit to the idea that these hands or this flesh is rotting away. So we'll get a little bit more there. Remember, just dip my brush in. I have a little bit on his wrist. Don't want to forget the wrist. Just kind of dab it in place. And definitely we want to get this hand here. Looking at the eyes, though, now I'm triple guessing the eyes. I might go in and add a little something. The way that the wash had dried out made them look like very hollow eye sockets, but that purple is kind of showing through in the eyes. And so I might want to add a dab of color in there of some sort. I have to think about what I want to do. But for the most part, we're pretty much done other than the basing, and we'll get to that probably in the next cut. Okay, I went ahead and switched the camera angle a little bit. I'm hoping this has improved the lighting here for you. But as you can see, I went around the rim here. Actually, it took about 3 coats. That Steel Legion Drab, even though it's a base paint and generally is a little thicker in pigmentation, it actually still, and even not watered down, the white Wraithbone was kind of showing through. So I actually went around the rim about 3 different times there to get a decent enough coverage. As far as our little rock goes, that's made out of cork. That took about 2 coats. That cork kind of soaked up that very first a little bit of paint there, so we went over it a second time. And while it's still wet, we can go ahead and move forward and start putting on our texture paint. So I'm going to just place this aside right now, and I think I might use 2 different brushes here. One, this kind of a thicker, fatter brush right here to put the initial paint on, and then we'll go ahead and use maybe a little bit of a smaller brush here just to get into some of the hard to reach areas here, just to spread it around. But I just want to remind you, we want a decent enough coat that it's not too thin, because if it's too thin, It won't crackle right, but if it's too thick, then we have to worry about obscuring some of the details on the foot or actually covering up the foot, and it takes a lot longer to dry and crack. So at this point here, I'm going to go ahead and put on a, kind of a semi-thick coat, and then we just have to let it dry and do its magic here. So going ahead and mixing this bottle up. And I had to put an agitator in here as well to get it going really good. And go ahead and just dive right in there and grab some of this paint up. And it has the kind of the consistency of a thick mud. So we're just going to get it right on there and just move it around. We don't want any major brush strokes or anything like that. So another reason I'm going to move in with the smaller brush here in a little bit. And then even though I painted the rim, I'm just going to use my finger once here, and then we're going to just go around the rim just to clean it up a little bit. So I just want to get the majority of this on with this thick brush right now. And then, like I said, we'll go in with the smaller brush here in a second and kind of spread some of this around. And even though you might see a little bit of brush strokes right here, it is wet, but as it dries, it will, some of the spaces will kind of fill in a little bit. Ooh, I want to get a little bit more. That might be a little bit too thin back in here. So we'll definitely put a nice little dollop right there and get it right underneath. And get right up to the feet here. And then we'll go ahead and use the small brush here just in a second. We've got to get that area behind. Oops, sorry, I'm getting it a little bit off camera there. Don't mean to do that. All right. Okay, now I'm going to grab my smaller brush, grab a little bit, maybe a little bit too much right there, and we got to get it right in behind and make sure it's nice and spread it out. If you see any obvious areas where it's thinner and thick and then thicker transition, go ahead and use your brush, kind of move it around a little bit while it's still wet. It takes a while for this to dry anyway, but we want that crackling property to really show up. So we're going to go ahead and move this thick paint around. I see a little bit where it might be a little thin still back here. I can kind of see a little bit of the underneath color peeking through. And so we're going to get that right in there. And at this point, we just more or less got to sit and wait. I'm going to smooth out some of these rough areas here. It's okay if we get a little texture, little bit in here. We'll obscure it in a little bit when we put some landscaping in. Oop, I see a little bit right back there by his foot that we missed. I'm getting underneath his heel right there, right up to his toes up here, bringing it right up to the edge. And at this point now, like I said, we just have to be patient and let it sit and dry and do its magic. So at this point now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it off, and we'll come back in a while after this dries and see what we come up with. And I'm sure even I'm going to be surprised at this. So let me focus in a little bit and see. You can see what I've got going on here. And we'll just kind of hope and pray for the best. Okay, welcome back. And this should be the final cut here. And we're bringing this whole model to fruition here. And let's just talk about some of the final details. Unfortunately, the crackle paint didn't come out as pronounced as I would have liked it to have been. As you can see here at the base, Although the red, yellow, and orange is kind of peeking through, it just didn't come out as pronounced as I would have liked. So maybe next time I go ahead and try a thicker coat and see how that works out. As far as our cork went, remember I painted that with a 50-50 mix of Tolaran sand and Zandri dust. And once that dried, I went ahead and applied a wash of Army Painter Strong Tone to bring out some more of those details. And then for highlights, I went ahead and finished with kind of a 1-2 of Dry Paints Tyrant Skull and Terminatus Stone, which is a slightly lighter version there. That just brings out a lot of those nooks and crannies and the grooves that are down in there. So I think that turned out pretty good. Finally, for landscaping, I went ahead and used some yellow flowers from Army Painter and a little bit of a desert tuft. I came back in one more time with painted the rim with a Steel Legion drab one more time around the rim, just to make sure it was a solid coat and fix any kind of the crackle paint that might have leaked over. And then finally, the eyes. As you know, I kind of struggled trying to make a decision about the eyes. I went ahead and decided to go with a kind of a magical blue. So using Green Stuff World's metal color blue, I put in Neptunus blue deep into the sockets there. I still think it was lacking a little something, so I came back in with my smallest paintbrush and using Temple Guard blue, I went ahead and put in a few little pupils there, and see if I can zoom in. And yeah, it came out pretty decent. I'm happy with it. Again, I could always second guess myself on the eyes, but you know, overall, it turned out okay. So with that being done, I'm going to go ahead and call this one completed. I hope you enjoyed this. If so, please go ahead and leave me a comment, either good or bad, subscribe, and let me know what you think overall about painting the Mummy from Ravensburger Horrified. And we'll go ahead and continue on with this series. I think we'll be doing the Wolfman next, and just give you a little sneak preview here. I've already pre-primed him with gray sear paint, and we'll go ahead and mount him up here, and we'll try some new contrast paints for the Wolfman. Well, with that being said, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon back here at Pips-N-Chits.